The following episode may contain discussions surrounding suicide, mental health disorders, self-harm, and other very real, very triggering topics. If, at any point during the episode, you or someone you know is in need of support, please don't wait. Call 988 or visit iasp.info to easily access resources or have a one-on-one conversation with a certified mental health expert. Coach,
Caleb,
thank you for coming in.
glad
Really
to be
appreciate it. This is really exciting for us specifically because this is not our first in-person interview, but this is the first time that I think a majority of the people who support the podcast all came together to make this happen. So we had, obviously we're in, well, not obviously, obvious to us because we're here, but for our viewers, we're in Go Global headquarters in Syracuse, New York for the first time. Huge sponsor for the podcast. We got some new shoes from Novelo. We've been sent light years ago, it seems, and we're trying to work closely with them. I mean, we have Top Shot Transport. Just talked to them the other day. Zant has got their beta app coming up. They're helping us out with an affordable mental health care. So it's first session free. After that, prices start at $25 for college students, up to $40 a session. So insurance or not, I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that, Zant, if you're watching. But, and then last but not least, Empire Specialty Printing, close family friend from Oswego. They're helping us out with some future projects. So all exciting stuff to get this to this very moment. But we're here because of you, and the fact that I was thinking, I use other podcasts for inspiration, if you can imagine that. And one of the podcasts I listened to most recently, Jay Shetty, he was talking about how teachers can be a massive source of inspiration for youth and their mental health. I was like, wait a minute. I know someone who was a teacher, someone who's a coach, and someone who's a mentor, and someone who was a past athlete. So I'm like, why not call this guy? I mean, I text him once a year praying that he still has the same phone number. So we're thankful you do. But for our viewers who don't know, this is Steve Cary, former tennis coach for the girls at Cicero North Syracuse in Central New York, for the boys at Liverpool High School with myself, former Syracuse University soccer player, if I'm not mistaken, former semi-pro soccer player and semi-pro tennis player. I mean, he does it all, and I don't know your technical title currently, but I assume it's a mentorship role.
Oh, well, it's not a title in particular. We work with a group of men several days during the course of the week, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening, sometimes one-on-one, group setting. It varies. So, no title.
Well, just any men in general, or?
Largely, these are guys who share a common faith.
Okay.
They're followers of Christ. And that they will, well, we got an older set, what we call the knuckleheads, that meet Wednesday mornings. They're largely 65 years of age and over because they're in retirement mode. We've got a few exceptions to that. And then Tuesday nights, it's a little bit more raw because some of the guys are coming from various points of brokenness, not unlike myself in time past. And I have a group of guys on Monday nights that I meet with. We call ourselves Intentional Fathers, and that's driven by a book that was written by a guy named Jon Tyson. And it is intended to be able to raise kids with intentionality, chiefly through the most formative stage before they leave the home, whether they're going off to college or they're going off to get a job. So those are largely the three groups that we work with.
Well, thank you for being here today.
Sure.
Hopefully we can pick your expertise in that area, as well as just some life experience that you've gathered, because a lot of the guests that we have on are currently still in college. No offense intended, so I apologize if that was received that way. But it's always nice for me to revisit with someone who I haven't seen in a while, that for the first time I'm like, wait a minute, now I understand what they were trying to teach me a little bit better as a tennis coach. And I mean, one memory that comes to mind, anyone who's had Coach Cary as a tennis coach, at least at the Liverpool boys program, knows if you can spike the ball over top of the fence, you might end up with some Wendy's fries.
You might.
And I gave you a hard time about it because I didn't get my Wendy's fries for a while, and then one day you just showed up with them after I'd forgotten about it, and I was like, wow.
A faithful man who can find
Wendy's.
Well earned, though.
I think it took me like 3 out of my 4 years to get it. I was just trying all the time, and finally I got it. So there's a giant fence at the edge of the tennis courts, and I don't know, I think Jake Kidd, shout out Jake Kidd, he served it over nice and gently. I think we planned it. I think I offered him a fry or two if he just served it to me gently so I could spike it back. But, it's those little actions, though, that stick with you longer than going to sectionals and doing decent. Obviously, I've been to sectionals a handful of times for tennis as my second sport. That's good in itself, but when you go back to the end of the day, at the end of the day when you lay in bed, it's like, okay, cool, I can have that trophy or that t-shirt, but I want the fries. If that makes sense.
Bottom line, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think that style of coaching for you, like, because I don't necessarily know if it was servant leadership, although as a coach myself now, there are thankless tasks that you do where you consider yourself as a servant leader. That style of, I don't even know what to call it, but just genuine nature, was that taught to you from a mentor, or is it just something you picked up and you're like, I want these guys or young women to really feel the impact I have beyond trophies?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's too much at a conscious level, but I think there was one thing that I found to be true, and that is you can have a whole lot of head knowledge. You can know all the X's and O's in any given sport, and trying to bring an athlete or bring a team to a certain point of performance. But if you don't make some headway related to winning their hearts, all that, both in terms of the short term, is probably going to be not successful, and in the long run as well. That's hit or miss, because sometimes your style or your interactive ability with an athlete, it gains some traction, sometimes not.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that responds to your question.
No, 100%. It kind of leads me to another question I have, is like, how difficult is it for you when I spoke to another coach, Coach Jason Leone at Oswego State basketball, and he talked about how difficult it is when a student athlete is not receptive to your coaching style, and you try so hard to make an impact on their life, but you just know that as soon as they leave your program, they won't even think of you again. Does that affect you at all, or is it just like, hey, I'll put out there what I would like to and hope it sticks with people?
Yeah, I don't think I would be honest if I said, it doesn't impact you. And there's been certainly over the years a number of times in which an athlete has chosen to go, or they've done certain things that have made it necessary for them to leave the team. And whether you're in teaching or you're in coaching, I think there's a level of self-report that usually impacts, because you care. And a part of what they choose or choose not to do is a reflection, or whether it's valid or not. I think you take it personally.
Is that always the case, that personal connection for you, or is that something you developed the longer you got into your coaching career?
Probably was always there. That it might have mattered too much, because sometimes there's just some hard things that need to be said, sometimes hard decisions that need to be for the sake of the team in particular, and that may not fall well related to your personal relationship with that given athlete, but it may be absolutely necessary and the best thing for the whole of the group. So, not sure if that helps.
Well, it does help.
Okay.
I promise you it helps, because it just me personally as a coach, it's like there are decisions that you can make as the assistant coach that you might not agree with your head coach on.
Right.
So I'm the assistant coach up at the Oswego State women's soccer program for the time being, and I might be like, I really don't think this is going to work, but because I'm coaching for something bigger than me, and at the end of the day, he gets the big bucks for a reason, we'll just say that, I have to kind of figure out how to sometimes be that middleman and tell the girls, like, look, you're going to have to buy into what coach wants, because there's 2 hours before the game and you don't have time to change it. And that for me was a hard lesson to learn, because you never want to undermine someone who is only doing what they think is in best interest for something bigger than them. Because at the end of the day, that coaches get paid to make those decisions. They're not just going to make a decision knowing it's going to affect where they make their living, if that makes sense. Like,
sure.
You're not going to sit there and just be like, well, I know Caleb's really good at tennis or really bad at tennis, we'll say. Let's put him at first singles. Like, that's your job. So what I had to learn is, like, while it is your job, it's also, like, how do you deliver that news in a manner where you're not destroying someone's self-esteem, or you're not pitting the team against each other or the coach. Go Global is a free-flowing technology company that handcrafts, embellishes, and manufactures garments and accessories. Designed on the principles of people, places, and possibilities, Go Global reimagines fashion and is inspired by you, the people of the world.
Yeah, I don't know there's a clear-cut answer there, and a lot of the times I think you have to carefully navigate both the facts that you're faced with, the circumstances you're faced with, and also the very different heart of the athlete that you're dealing with. Because you know full well, just like you're just suggesting before, that certain athletes respond with certain coaches or certain philosophies.
I mean, you could yell at me, whereas you might not be able to yell at a different athlete. They might take a gentler approach.
Right.
Like, I know if you sat here and screamed at me, I understand it's constructive criticism. I can separate the tone from the message.
That's a lot of maturity. And
well, I used to not, so.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, good on you.
Tennis might have helped me because I couldn't really yell in the middle of the court. We all have our moments. I do my fair share of yelling at referees. So.
Well, there's some healthy part of that too. Is that, I mean, it'd be awfully nice, wouldn't it, if you were a coach or part of a team that everybody was like a robot and did everything exactly according to what you wanted to, but that's not real life, and nobody's like
Russian
that.
Olympics, 1980.
Well, okay,
maybe that's the only team in history there. The Miracle on Ice team take it down. But.
Again.
But even then, the seemingly perfect in-line team lost to a team that was rough around the edges.
That's right. Yeah, and I would say another part of the coaching philosophy part, in some of the notes that I advanced to you, I was citing a guy who was pretty significant athlete in the Syracuse days, back in the day, named Joe Ehrman. And Joe Ehrman had the privilege of being able to be an athlete both for the Syracuse University lacrosse team as well as the Syracuse University football team. So he had the opportunity to be coached by Schwartzwalder in the heyday of a strong period of time for SU football. And he also, I think, was coached by Roy Simmons Jr., I believe is the other coach. But what was reflected in that were two radically different styles of coaching. He described Schwartzwalder, as great as he was, as being a transactional coach. Basically taking athletes and I think largely having the mentality of saying, do it my way or hit the highway. Whereas Simmons looked on his athletes individually as reading what they had already there and nurturing the heart of that particular athlete. Now, mind you, I can't tell you how in the world he navigated that from one person to the next. I think so. But what I think it did was to afford the freedom of risk. And what I mean by that, if you're on a playing field, regardless of what the particular sport is, and you know you have a coach back there who fundamentally believes in you and believes in your performance and says, you know what, I am behind you no matter what the outcome, then I think the athlete has a greater freedom to be able to risk on the field, maybe trying things that they've never done before, as opposed to being in an environment who says, you know, you're only as good as your last play. And if you screw up, I'm putting your butt on the bench. Those are very different environments. And I don't know if it's universally true, but I strongly feel that the Roy Simmons embrace the heart of the athlete mentality to be able to afford them the freedom to be able to make mistakes, improves an athlete's performance because they're willing to try things that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be the case.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do, like, when the game ends too, in a multitude of ways. Like when the game ends, in terms of, okay, the game's done, now I got to go home and do my homework. If you're a student athlete, like, okay, coach believed in me enough on the field where I could take the mistake and approach the shot and maybe miss it.
Right.
So then that mentality sometimes, I mean, that's the coach's hope, transfers over to, hey, this is a really challenging math question. If I make a mistake, I know coach is still going to have my back tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, and I think athletes, at least the vast majority of athletes I've ever had the privilege to be around, are very intelligent. They can read a mile away what they're getting back, if anything, from the coach. And I've seen, some harsh coaches too who have been basically more concerned about their wins and losses and the outcome as opposed to the performance part of competing.
Do you think there's a healthy medium? Because sometimes everyone needs a little
kick in the butt.
Oh yeah, we'll keep it PG. Yeah, a little kick in the butt. But also, yeah, some people do need that get going. Like, I know you're capable of more. They need tough love.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a healthy medium, and do you think you found it in your coaching career?
Okay, so part of my own brokenness includes the people-pleasing tendencies. For whatever root cause that was, I think that also weighs noticeably in my past interaction with people. So that's part of it.
Let's just exist there for a moment. Sure. Because I mean, it's quite obvious, anyone that knows me, that's one of my tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know it's a lot of my friends' tendencies and their friends' tendencies. So it's not, well, it feels like an isolating tendency. I think there is community in it. Can we exist in the people-pleasing space for a moment?
Yeah, you could. I think for me, and I'm not saying this for any other person or whatever, that people-pleasing tendency is traces its way back to identity. But where do I get my affirmation from? Now, if I get my affirmation from my peers, guys I coach, fellow coaches, fellow teachers, that is like trying to predict, I think, the weather in Syracuse. It's very unsettled ground. And I would say that part of my journey, and this may sound rather strange, but my journey in the last 8 years, I would say, has been more shifting my identity related to placing it on people, and having recognized that that's been my past pattern for the vast majority of my life, and shifting it to my identity in God. And in that's an anchor and a rock and a safe place that doesn't necessarily now become dependent upon whether somebody has a favorable reaction to me or not. It's much greater freedom to be able to, I think, speak truth, but do that in love.
And take those risks that you hoped your athletes would, in a way.
That's exactly right, Caleb. That's a great comparison, and whether intentional or not, it's a good illustration of hypocrisy for having preached.
Well, it was definitely not intended. And I don't know if it's
true.
Hypocrisy as much as it is growth, personal growth and learning. I think there's a difference, because I think when you were coaching, you necessarily were focusing so much on your athletes because of the goodness out of your heart, and the people-pleasing tendencies fed that. Whereas I think once you had coaching for whatever reason or another leave your life, or you chose to leave coaching, the space to exist as yourself represented itself for the first time in a long time. And then you had the room to just, I mean, for better or for worse, think, and then find your new identity that was probably always there, just kind of pushed down, and then learn that, oh my goodness, this is what I wanted my student athletes to pick up. Let's try it for myself. Like, why would I coach for this long and tell them to do this and hope it sticks when it might not even stick for me? So I don't think I would call it hypocrisy, because to me, hypocrisy is doing something well, fully knowing that you're doing the opposite. I don't think, and this I might be assuming, so this is more of a question. I don't think you knew at the time that you could be being hypocritical.
That may be true. There may be truth in what you say. Yeah. But it's a sad revelation, to be at the time. I think I was in my late 50s. I think when we first saw each other, that you get to that stage of life and you're still lacking that level of self-awareness. But I'm grateful in that eventually arriving to it. Increased awareness there. It's a good thing. So.
Yeah, and I mean, from the outside, you were always a happy-go-lucky person. At least that's how you presented yourself, whether you knew it or not. It was always like you showed up with a smile on your face to practice. And again, I can only speak from our program, but I'm assuming it transferred over into other parts of your life. I know family is very important to you, but what role did family play in your life so that you could present Coach Cary, the happy, encouraging, motivating person to us?
Well, I think there are levels. In general, I'm very grateful for my wife. I'm very grateful for my kids. But I think in terms of trying to go after some carrot of coaching success, time-wise, that was at the expense of some time with my kids. And now I'm in a season in terms of trying to chase after a deeper appreciation and recovery where possible in the relationship with my kids. I mean, I put a letter to each one of my kids relating to my intended desire to be able to recover a relationship and to apologize for the neglect of having put my time and energy oftentimes outside. When we chase sports stuff all the time, and you can relate to this, going to a soccer showcase or a tournament outside of the state or whatever, was at the expense a lot of weekends of just plain family time. And that I look back on it with some level of regret. And it's not like I'm losing complete sleep over it or that I'm crying every night or whatever, but it was clear that if I had to do it over again, it was great that our kids had the opportunity to be able to participate in a variety of sports and compete. And there's good things about that, to be sure. But I don't know that I fully appreciated the power and the significance of a parent to be able to say no to certain things. Mm-hmm. Say no to going off and competing on a Sunday when you're away for a weekend tournament there, or say no to going out of state occasionally because we have some priority of just being together as a group and to do something together relationally. So that's kind of the regret. And in terms of my family, I love my kids, every one of them. And it varies where the quality of a relationship is for each one of them now, but I'm kind of at a posture of wanting to hear their story. And I think that hearing the story is so vital. It's vital to our guys' groups to be able to have them articulate, well, what was it like? To ask this question, for example, what was it like for you to grow up with me as your dad? And to sit with that, rather than just kind of maybe say, I was really busy. I was providing all the time. I was doing all several kind of defense things. It's more like seeking after what their real heart is and where you missed it, and that's informative and helpful because it helps you if relationship is going to continue, how to navigate those waters later in life. I hope. I'm taking in faith this is going to be true. So.
Yeah, and I can't help but notice a few patterns in your story, at least. I think, for better or worse, people pleasing is stuck with you for forever. It's just how to navigate that, because I heard, again, in your coaching, the people pleasing tendencies, in yourself, the people pleasing tendencies, and then the inability to tell your children no.
Right.
I mean, obviously you want to care for and please the people that mean the most to you in the world. So that obviously is just, we don't have to get into that anymore. We know it's with you. But the second thing I noticed is just you're very intentional on allowing people to experience things on their own time, but providing them with the tools necessary to do it. And again, I wonder if that comes from, I think, just your natural born ability to be a leader or a coach, and transitioning into your new role. It's like, if these are the questions you're asking these, won't consider us all young men, but these men that you're working with, I think it's important that they come to it on their own rather than you being like, well, I know how you feel, and making it feel accusatory. Because people that come to that group, and again, a general assumption, I'm assuming don't want to be fixed, just like the rest of us. No one wants to just feel like you're broken and need to be fixed. We want to feel healed. We want to feel connected. We want to feel a sense of belonging. We want a warm hug at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean a cast to fix your broken arm. Again, you talk a lot about in the notes you sent me the similarities between the mental preparation or the physical preparation for sports and the mental preparation for sports, right? We go to the gym to lift weights to get stronger. We do 1,000 repetitions of our tennis serve to hopefully not make the mistake when we all get to Wimbledon, because we're all that good. But, the same thing with the mental ability. You can't physically take that racket from me and make that swing. I have to mess up 1,000 times on that swing before I get my Wendy's.
Sure.
So what does that provide to you, knowing that you can provide these people with tools, and it might take a long time and a lot of digging and crying and laughing and all these emotions, but that aha moment, does that provide you with some source of just like, Empire Specialty Printing is a family-owned and operated screen printing and promotional products company. ESP has been in business for over a decade by providing consistent and high-quality service. Products include custom hoodies, shirts, hats, business supplies, and much, much more. Whether it's for a family party, school team, group, or corporate apparel, Empire Specialty Printing has what you need to get the ball rolling.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a very small window of time related to, I think, any coach's ability to impact the performance of a player. And it takes all those levels there with mental, physical, spiritual, social even. Surely it's satisfying when they have their aha moment. But what I love is the fact that they have, typically my experience has been that aha moment has been self-discovery. It's like, oh, I figured out that if I coach effectively in this given time, that I can pick up that ball with some regularity, or
and then hit it perfectly, and you're just like, whoa.
That's the way yeah, right. And I mean, isn't that true for all of us? When we come to that point where we just, the light switch goes, and now both understanding as well, it just is in perfect sync with performance, then there's a thing of beauty that unfolds. So sure, that's satisfying.
Yeah, and I think, I use this analogy kind of comically. It's like hearing it from your parents and then hearing it from your brothers. It's one thing to say from your mom, oh, you need to clean your room, but then if your brother walks in and goes, the heck is that, dude? Clean your room. Like, you're like, oh crap, like it's not just mom telling me to clean my room for the 1,000th time. I think that sense of relief when you can even find that yourself. Like if you walked into the room and smelled your own dirty laundry and you were like, all right, that's enough dirty laundry. I use very elementary analogies, but that's just kind of how my brain works. If you can smell your own dirty laundry, I don't know how I got down this road, but and bring it to the washing machine and then come back with it just clean, I think that's awesome. But what I think for me, again, a lot of my questions stem from personal curiosity. I full well know those clothes are going to get dirty again, and then I'm going to have to wash them one more time. That's where the anxiety and the confusion and all that comes from, because in a couple of the mental health writings I've done, it's like I had the experience of experiencing the end of my career before it was even over. And what I mean by that is I played soccer for, I don't know, as long as I can remember, probably 20 years. In the 18th year of that career, COVID hit. And it's like, okay, you're done with your sport now. You just sit with it. And I knew I wasn't done with my sport. So I was like, oh my God, this is what it's going to be like in a year and a half. I have to figure out who I am. Because I had athletic identity and didn't know it. I was just like you said, soccer tournament here, tag along with a brother here. And our family was very fortunate enough to have our tournaments be at the same location. So we have so many fun memories of just chilling in the hotel room and, I don't know, teasing dad in the car or whatever, but it's funny. Well, I think it's funny. He might not, but I think I guess my question for you is, what is it like for you that, again, to go back to my elementary analogy, your clothes are going to get dirty again, you're going to spill on them, but you now have the tools to wash them. What is that? Does that resonate with you at all?
Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so like, I don't know, for a long time, we'll go back to your people-pleasing ability. And I don't call it a disability because it is an ability, whether you like it or not.
Okay.
It does have its benefits. But so growing up, you had this ability of people-pleasing, for better or for worse. You realize it now. You smelled your dirty laundry, for lack of better words.
Right.
It's never going to go away. You know it's going to come back again. How do you navigate that once your people, like you catch yourself in the act of people-pleasing?
May vary according to the particular moment at hand about that, but what I found, this is not a direct answer, kind of indirect in answering your question, is there's much greater freedom when your identity is more clearly established in your mind, because you don't risk being rejected, because although you might care about what a person says or how they respond to you, they may say no, they may say I have nothing to do with you, whatever that is. It's not as if along with that response, whatever it might be, it carries with self-report, your true identity. It's independent of that. So, okay, dirty laundry, sure, that'll rise, to be sure, but I think it has to do with what we do in recovery, whether it's athletically or it has to do with just saying, I recognize this thing here, and you know what, this is a moment in which I need to speak pretty straightforwardly and say what is true. And say it for true, not just because it's a truth, like I can declare to you that I'm right and beat my chest and be all self-satisfied, but because the truth itself has weight and power and significance both to you and the person that you're speaking to. And I think that's a definite paradigm shift for me in doing that more frequently, I'll put it that way. So if that makes sense.
It does, and there is power in truth. I mean, you can't go through life without telling a lie or a white lie. Like, you have to learn. But I found that whenever I speak my truth, I will say, because I think truth is a very strong word. Whenever I speak my truth, like in this, this is where I find my truth. Like, I can exist. I can tell you exactly how I feel. You can tell me how you feel. We can disagree, but what I'm saying is true to me, and what you're saying is true to you. If that makes sense.
I hear that.
So I think there's power in truth, because I've noticed lies have a funny way of coming back around and catching up with you. And I think, again, it's one thing to hear from your parents, it's another thing to experience it yourself. So I think there is this is complicated, because I think you should always speak the truth, but I guess I'll just ask you, do you think there are moments where it's necessary to lie?
I certainly felt that in times past. I'm definitely not practicing that these days. And I don't want to paint the picture that, oh yeah, I don't lie anymore. But I frankly am kind of hard pressed to be able to say.
Well, no, you just consciously try to tell the truth more often.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, you know, in the regular course of communicating with any human being, there are certain things that you quite consciously choose not to say because you know that is hard or critical or whatever, because it's serving very little purpose. But
I think that goes back, I mean, to reference an author, Jordan Peterson, very renowned psychologist, in his book, 12 Rules to Life, right, or An Antidote to Chaos. That's the subtitle. So if I got the main title wrong, you can Google it through that. But he, in one of his chapters, is tell the truth, or at the very least, don't lie. I think that's something that is very difficult to practice, because saying nothing is not necessarily telling the truth, but it's also not lying.
Right. That's much safer ground.
I guess, yes. But one thing I did want to ask you through our notes here is, like, you reference, at one point, you talk about when you have something for so long, kind of like us athletes do, and then it's stripped of itself, it just feels so isolating. And I kind of want to exist in the space of isolation for a moment, because I think it's scary, because we've seen with Robin Williams, unfortunately, you can be surrounded by the I guess you could say socially accepted version of success, of fame and money and what everyone aspires to be, and still feel so lonely and isolated. Just because there's people around you doesn't mean that you don't feel alone. Can we talk about that for a little bit?
Oh, sure. That is a theme, sadly, that is dominant in the hearts of many men that I am around. And it certainly was true for myself. I'm not saying that there aren't moments where I don't experience moments of loneliness or whatever, but I think for a variety of reasons, isolation exists for many men. And it may be because in my generation, we were talking before about some old Dick Tracy references. But in my generation, probably the iconic version of what it meant to be a man was to be John Wayne. What were the characteristics of a guy like John Wayne, right? He was independent, he was rugged, he never showed emotion, and he did it all on his own. And so it's almost as if, well, as you're growing up in our culture, it's like, well, if you're a real man, what you do is you do it on your own. Which is, I think, a pretty profound lie, both to the hearts as well as the experience of most men. So that's, I think, a pretty critical thing. And I would say you could find a lot of medical studies related to the terrible impact on health related to isolation. And we saw it in spades related to the COVID period, right? Just heaped on that. So I think the isolation thing, both in the athletic world as well as just where at least men, and this might be true for women too, but I don't know the world very well, that isolation is a terribly destructive arena. And the way I would say the counterbalance of that, with the guys that we work with, very often we try and emphasize story. And story is kind of critical for both self-awareness, but also to invite an opportunity for feedback for other men, so that those men can do just share their observations, or maybe even more powerfully, be able to say, man, Caleb, you told us about some really gritty stuff. You had the courage to be able to say that this traumatic experience happened in this particular moment. That provides for me the courage to be able to do likewise. So if you are in an environment in which you have a sense of community, now maybe it's with your guys from soccer team or the network of people, the realm that you had in Oswego, wherever that may be, if you know that you have the freedom to be able to just share your heart, that creates community, and it also breaks the large measure, I think, breaks all the destructive force of what isolation can bring into a person's life, and that's vital. And the other thing is that I think people are hungry for community, and I'm not sure that they know how to navigate it. How do they go about doing it? How do they find a friend? How do they get around a group of people that they can truly trust? And I'm not talking about some social setting, going to church or going to that club or doing that thing, but people who might be the type of person that you could call up at 2 a.m. in the morning and say, I got an emergency. My life is just getting destroyed. I need somebody to talk to. Well, if you consider that a lot of people completely don't have that kind of a relationship. And I think we also do, culturally, we what do we do if you, say, are off in a nursing care facility? Terribly characterized by environments of isolation. So I think one of the great challenges is, whether you're talking about the world of sports or family or in your own neighborhood, the great challenge is, where can I go to find kindred spirits who I can really trust? Because there's a health factor that goes along with that in breaking the isolation. I think it's absolutely gold in somebody's life.
Need a tow? Top Shot Transport is the place to go. From cars to machinery, heavy equipment to general freight, Top Shot Transport will give you the best rate. Top Shot Transport is fully licensed and ready to tow your stuff anywhere. Email topshottransport1@gmail.com for more information. Yeah, do you have any pointers on where to go to find someone like that, or do you think that depends on the individual?
Probably depends on the individual.
I know that's a tricky question. I apologize, but
no, it's all good. I would say my own personal experience to be able to find that was born out of desperation. And I would say, sadly, for the majority of guys that I deal with, at least on Tuesday night and maybe to a lesser extent on Monday nights, their stories are also examples of desperation, where they come to the point of, I can't do this on my own. I don't have a way to go. And then, it happens to be our particular situation to be able to find a community happens to be part of our church out in Manlius, where men have either been referred or encouraged or invited to come. Those would be places. But there's nothing sacred about four walls in a church. It's a group of people who are willing to get together and to be able to share with transparency, with vulnerability to one another. And then, for whatever reason, I think that is honored among the group of people. And it's with, reasonable conditions. Like, let's set an environment in which there's a level of confidentiality. I mean, I think AA does that magnificently. And I think for the degree that and I come from an alcoholic history as well, alcoholic family, the degree to which you are operating in an environment where you know that what's said there stays there, then you can operate with a higher level of trust for one another there. And it's not like, I automatically trust. My experience is that guys, quite rightly, have to test the waters. Mm-hmm. Is this a safe place? And once we find a place that's safe, you have, I think, a responsibility, kind of a corporate agreement within that group to trust each other, to lean on each other, and speak truth. And then that's an environment in which I think healing can take place, which is pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, I think that's pretty special advice. I mean, I just wonder if there's a way, and maybe there's not yet, maybe there is, I just haven't found it, to help people find those types of environments before they hit their desperation moment or their rock bottom moment. Do you think it's necessary to hit that rock bottom, or do you think we can start to maybe more socially promote, like, you don't have to go through something so traumatic or feel so alone to get the help you deserve?
That's a great question, Caleb. I think part of it is I'm biased towards the desperation part because, well, if other people are as stubborn as I am, we won't own our stuff most of the time. Now, if you happen to be a more level-headed individual, or you're greater awareness, or you understand things better, then maybe you would seek it out. But I find that to be more the exception rather than the rule.
We're a very reactive society, not the opposite. Struggling to find the correct word for the opposite of that, if you could help me out there. I almost said pre-active, but I don't think that's really a word.
Yeah, well...
Preventative?
Proactive?
There we go. See, I had the active part.
You did.
No, in all seriousness, I think we are more of a reactive culture. Like, we see something and then we do it, rather than learn from people in the past and say, like, this is going to happen. Like, my bones are going to get brittle the older I get. Can I stay more active, right? That's how we do it physically.
Sure.
Well, I know I'm going to face a lot more mental struggle in my life. Can I prepare myself for that, so therefore I might not experience the, I guess, as we call it, the desperation moment in this episode?
Right. I think efforts like your podcast here, and anyone who makes efforts in a similar direction of removing things, the stigma, for example, of saying, oh man, I'm really struggling with depression or anxiety or whatever the thing is for them, is vital to that normalizing of seeking help. But until that takes place more often, more consistently, my guess is that there's going to be at least a lot of guys operating in the shadows, right? And having to be waiting until the point of desperation, when the only place that they can look up is when they're flat on their back, right?
I find myself too in like this weird limbo, right? Because of course we want to normalize these conversations, but we don't want to desensitize them, and we also don't want to devalue something. And what I mean by this is, people can have depression, people can have anxiety, but people can be anxious and be depressed and not have anxiety and depression. Mm-hmm. Like you go through your day and you're like, man, I'm just sad today, and you can just exist as sad. But then some people, that's all they experience. I find myself like, I don't, and I go back to one of the pieces I wrote, can't save the world, right? But you combated that, and this is where I want to kind of go with, well, you can save yourself. I think the key to maybe helping people, now that I'm answering my own question, again, you've provided me with the tools to have my own aha moment here. It's like, if we can figure out how to, and within ourselves, right? Like I kind of referenced before, is maybe I know that I experience repetitively these sad moments. Let me go get the help, right? Not just shut myself out from the world and then further myself into this depressive state. Because I can't sit here and look at you and be like, oh, coach has anxiety. Only you know that deep down inside. Or coach has depression. Or coach is just sad today. Only you truly know those. So I think, again, places like where you operate and have conversations, like you mentioned, places where we exist in the podcasting world, I think what we're trying to do deep down is help those people realize that they know themselves better than anyone else. And if they feel they need that help, just try to go get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's really no harm in trying, because what we've seen comes after that trying, and those success stories is just a life of so much more clarity, if you will.
I agree with that. And I think there is an element related to, now, I'm no mental health professional by any stretch. But I think there's a lot to be said about not only the seeking part of, well, I'm struggling with this, and I would really like help here. Maybe a person would have that self-awareness. Maybe they would take the initiative to be able to go and do something. But there's also a lot to be said for seeking quality relationships where you would seek out a person. And I, if it's just one person, I mean, I'm in a season right now where I'm looking at meeting with regularity with a couple of guys. And that sounds like, kind of like that visual image that is often described about the guy who sees all these starfish on the shore, right? And he's picking up a starfish and throwing it back into the ocean to save a life. And the guy says, well, what does that matter? And the response is, well, for that one starfish I threw back, it mattered to him. And I think that there should be also an attitude, regardless of where you would self-identify your mental health or whatever, that we have an obligation to those people in our own realm to keep pretty close tabs and ask hard questions sometimes, or seek time with them. Because, I mean, you can easily have something to say about breaking the isolation by simply saying, Caleb, why don't we go get some coffee? Or you say that to me. Said, Coach, you seem kind of sad. Want to get some time? That is a small thing, but I think has tremendous value and importance to the heart of a person.
College can be a roller coaster, but Xant's got your back. First session, absolutely free. After that, just $25. Easy on the pocket, heavy on support. Stress, burnout, addiction, or trauma. Xant's expert coaches are here for you. Download the app, kick stress to the curb, and own your college journey. Your mental health, your way. Xant. Download and thrive today.
I appreciate that too, because I think a lot of times the mental health world is seen as like dramatic changes, right? I think it's like people go to therapy to then get better, but it really can be those simple acts of kindness, we'll call them, that can initiate the growth within the individual.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people are like, oh my goodness, I have to, and sometimes it's necessary, right? Sometimes we hear these stories where like you actually have to walk your roommate to the health center to help them get the help they need. I'm not saying it doesn't get there. I'm saying, to get back to my point of can we prevent it from getting there? Yeah. It is those small steps that, I don't know, unless you're going to Starbucks, costs like $3.50 to try and help your friend, right? Then, I don't know, don't let the deterrent of Starbucks price of coffee stop you from hurting your friend. But my point being is like, you don't always have to take this big approach to helping someone discover that they need help or help them discover who they are. It could be, hey coach, want to come on the podcast?
Yeah.
Like
you did.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like to me that is a small gesture, but I don't know what that means to you, right? And I don't need to. That could just exist wherever it needs to exist. And I think, again, that over-explaining, as I'm doing now, something that I'm working on in full transparency, but it's like, to me, it's those small moments, again, all the way back to, now that I'm thinking about it, the Wendy's fries that help you realize what really matters in your own life and what can matter in those around you. And again, I think it's all this giant interconnected web that we call life, to be honest.
Yeah.
But
Well said.
I didn't know if you had anything in particular you wanted to kind of ask me about here as we round out the episode. I know I don't do this with all my guests, but something was telling me to ask you that. So
Okay.
if it's a no, it's a no, and we move on. But I just figured I'd invite that question.
Well, so for you, I mean, in the realm of trying to take steps that would encourage community or break isolation, are there certain things that you've learned that may not necessarily automatically go to seeking professionals first, but are those kind of incremental steps that have been helpful?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And a lot of the discovery that I did previous to this podcast was in athletics. And one of the things that I love my coach for, we'll stick with that. I love my coach for. He pulled it from another coach, I'm pretty sure. It was called Safe Seat. And it's kind of like what you do with your program or your group. I don't necessarily know if it's a program, but basically is what it was is coach left the room. And before he did, he was like, all right, I need each person to get up in the front of the room and tell everyone on the team one thing about yourself that you'd be scared to tell them and they couldn't know from looking at you. And if it ever leaves this room and I find out who did it, that person is off the team. No questions asked. He pulled it from a football team, and I'm not sure which one. But Safe Seat is what it's called, so if people want to look it up to reference it. And it was just so powerful because there were things that were said in that room where you're just like, my goodness, like,
I never know.
yeah, like, and it could have been, it was awesome to see the variability in what people deemed as something scary to tell, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll use myself as an example. Coach can't kick me off the team now, can he? But for me, right, I shared at the very beginning as a freshman that I was colorblind, right? And that was a big step for me not because of the fact that I'm colorblind, like everyone knew, and they probably wish I didn't tell them anymore. But at that moment, it was like, I'm 18 years old. Yes, I had a brother on the team, an actually blood-related brother, not a friend who I call a brother. But it was just like one of those moments where I had to go up and everyone was looking at me, and it was like, this is terrifying. I don't know half of them. What don't they know about me looking? And just the pure action of speaking was enough to then next year help me share something more vulnerable to let the team know, and so forth, all the way up until my on-field experience of an anxiety attack. And at that point, I was forced to tell the team what it was as the captain. Like, I felt that obligation, but I don't know if I didn't have that Safe Seat experience of I can tell these people things and not be afraid. So I think I'd like to go back to your point, that sense of confidentiality, if you can find that in a friend or a group of friends. And I argue a group of friends because it's a lot of weight to place on one person.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I argue in a group of friends that is someplace I would start for my athletic listeners. But for my non-athletic listeners, well, we're all athletic, right? For my non-athlete listeners, I think that community exists around you already and you just don't know it. And I think you will find it as long as you actively try, and you won't find it as long as you actively try not to, because I think there is that distinction. If you're not trying to do something, you're actively trying not to do it, in my opinion. I argue anyways. So I think as long as you look for that community, and you'll know the right people, and you'll stumble and you'll fall and you'll find what you think are the right people and they're not, but eventually you'll get there as long as you don't give up.
I think that's true. I think also too for guys, it's not uncommon for them to be wrestling with the issue of shame. Whether it's part of their own story in the back, maybe something happened when they were a young kid, or it happened with their parents, or whatever the situation, it's almost the fear of reporting it is greater than the reality. And once you name it, then it ushers in a potential freedom that maybe for some of the guys that we deal with hasn't been experienced almost their entire adult life. And I don't know how that dynamic works, but I've seen it happen a fair amount, where just the naming part is, what would be counterintuitive, the naming part opens up like a fresh window.
Similar to my experience.
Yeah.
The naming part for me was just the ability to speak openly about anything, you know?
Right.
And then later came those steps of, oh my gosh, I can trust these people. I can do this. Like you said, feel it out. Just start with one piece of information and go from there. You don't you don't have to take that big all at once approach if you don't want to. It is possible, but if it's not for you, then you don't have to.
Yeah, and I think it's uncommon to just kind of, oh, here's all my dirty laundry, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I could probably play the devil's advocate on that one, and then you'll probably come back with a smarter answer. So let's do this. I think for me, my first therapist, I've seen 2 therapists, and my first one, the perfect introductory to therapy I could have asked for. Because I thought it was this big, scary thing where people went to get fixed. Like, I have a cold, I go to the doctor's office, they give me medicine. I go to therapy, they give me steps. I'm no longer broken, for lack of better knowledge at the time. Yeah. And I wish, and this is partially me for the amount that I shared with her, I wish that I shared more so we could work on more sooner. But I can't go back and fix that. So she was perfect for introductory therapy, taught me it wasn't scary, that safe places outside of my family did exist. Second therapist, day 1, I was like, here, I know how to do my laundry, but I don't have time. This is everything that has gone on. To get back to my dirty laundry reference, I just was like, this is what I'm struggling with. I know from my last therapist, this is what I need to work on. I know I can trust you. Let's just get to it. So for me, I think that is a moment where I could throw her on everything, but if I had to kind of go against what I just said, actually, in a way, I think it's because of that introductory therapist that helped me do that.
You had a high level of trust.
Exactly. But my immediate thought was, there's no moment where people just go bleh and splurge everything. Well, I did have that moment just with my second therapist.
It can happen then.
Yeah, and I guess I answered my own question. So.
Yeah. Well, it's rare, I would say, for the guys that I deal with, for them to share it all. They seem to kind of go in degrees, and where they finally feel a level of trust, the greater truth is shared there. And another dynamic that I think C.S. Lewis says something to the effect of, at the point where I, in hearing a story, said, me too, that's where friendship is born. And I think, whether it has to do with just sharing that you're colorblind, or you have anxiety, or you have depression, or there's a history of suicide in the family, or alcoholism, or whatever it might be, it is remarkable to me how consistently the response is for somebody to have a me too reaction to that. And that is another element of the great freedom. So really good on you to have that trust level so quickly. I don't think that is typical. So.
And again, I'm noticing a pattern within myself. I kind of noticed with you in the beginning. I think similarly to how I shared something, pretty minuscule in the grand scheme of things, like colorblindness doesn't affect me that much, with the team, and then took it to the next level, the next level, the next level. I guess I didn't just splurge everything. It just happened that she was the next person in line that I trusted. Mm-hmm. Whereas, again, during Safe Seat, it was colorblind. The next year, it was another thing. The next year, it was a larger and a larger thing. Like you said, it was oh my gosh, like, if I was capable of just saying this, someone else could get something out of it. Again, that starfish. To just connect that web all again. It's each of these steps that you realize. And as much as, like, it stinks sometimes to have anxiety or OCD, I'm thankful that, kind of go, not to diminish what you've said, but I've realized it at 24 instead of 50. So what you're doing matters.
My heart's desire is that would be universally true for guys and gals who are younger. So
yeah, so well, I think, just for listeners' sake and attention span of most people, we're near the end of our episode.
It's been a pleasure, man.
I would like to do one last little segment that I've started to do in the live episodes, and just ask you 3 rapid fire questions, maybe 2 if I can't think of 3.
Don't guarantee
and just have you answer.
Okay.
But and then we'll close. So the first question I have for you is, if you could hug one person right now that you know desperately needs it, just give us their first name in case they see this. Who would you give a hug to?
That's a great question. My daughter.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. There's a hug from Dad. Someone outside your family that you could give a hug to?
Probably. Give me a moment. Yes, Tom.
All right. Tom, Hug from Steve. I love that question because I shouldn't say everyone, a majority of our guests choose family. So I like to make it difficult. So it's not just making it difficult for you, because there's always someone outside of your family that needs a hug. And then the last question I have for you is, and I'm going to shamelessly steal this from Jay Shetty. If you can make one rule for the entire world to follow, wow, what would it be? It's a very powerful thing, but
which would, to do it rightly, would require a lot of thought, I think.
Well, I mean, some people say like, oh, eat PB&J sandwiches every day, or like some people really get into it. So there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, I guess it would be to forgive. Not just to forgive others, but also forgive yourself.
Well, I think we can end there.
Okay.
For most of our listeners. What I want to do is I want to open the floor for you, because I know you did this for tennis a lot, and I appreciated it, to end on a quick prayer. So if people don't wish to participate in the prayer, just thank you for listening to the podcast. But if you do, if you'd be comfortable leading us through a closing prayer, Coach.
Sure.
I know you did it before our tennis matches, and you did the same thing. You invited us to participate or not, and I loved it. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate it.
You bet. I can do that. Thanks. Oh, Lord God, thanks for the great privilege it is to reunite with Caleb and for what he is doing here. Lord, I pray that this podcast would reach many hearts and translate to healing in the lives of the people who may be hungry for just that. And I thank you for the privilege it is to be around the Munski family and to have this time just talking about life. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, man.
Thanks, Coach.